The Monastery of Geghard in Geghard, Armenia. The Monastery of Geghard contains a number of churches and tombs, most of them cut into the rock, which illustrate the very peak of Armenian medieval architecture. The complex of medieval buildings is set into a landscape of great natural beauty, surrounded by towering cliffs at the entrance to the Azat Valley. The Monastery of Geghard and the Upper Azat Valley contains a number of churches and tombs, most of them cut into the living rock, which illustrate Armenian medieval architecture at its highest point. The complex of medieval buildings is set into a landscape of great natural beauty, at the entrance to the Azat Valley. High cliffs from the northern side surround the complex while the defensive wall encircles the rest. The monuments included in the property are dated from the 4th to the 13th century. At the early period, the monastery was called Aivank, monastery in the cave, because of its rock-cut construction. The monastery was founded, according to tradition, by Saint Gregory the Illuminator, and was built following the adoption of Christianity as a state religion in Armenia, beginning of the 4th century AD. The main architectural complex was completed in the 13th century AD and consists of the cathedral, the adjacent narthex, eastern and western rock-cut churches, the family tomb of Proshyan princes, Papuks and Ruzukin's tomb chapel, as well as various cells and numerous rock-cut cross stones, kars. The Cathogic, main church, is in the classic Armenian form, an equal-armed cross inscribed in a square in plan and covered with a dome on a square base, linked with the base by vaulting. The east arm of the cross terminates in an apse, the remainder being square. In the corners are small barrel-vaulted two-story chapels. On the internal walls there are many inscriptions recording donations. The masonry of the external walls is particularly finely finished and fitted. A gavet, entrance hall, links it with the first rock-cut church. The first rock-cut church was built before 1250, entirely dug into the rock and on an equal-armed cruciform plan. To the east, a roughly square chamber cut into the rock was one of the princely tombs, zhamatoun, of the Proshyan Dynasty. This gives access to the second rock-cut church built in 1283. The second zhamatoun, reached by an external staircase, contains the tombs of the princes Merik and Grigor. A defensive wall encircled the monastery complex in the 12th to 13th centuries. Most of the monks lived in cells excavated into the rock face outside the main defensive wall, which have been preserved, along with some simple oratories. St. Astvatsatsan, Holy Mother of God, chapel is the most ancient preserved monument outside the ramparts and is located on the western side. It is partially hewed in the rock. There are engraved inscriptions on the walls, the earliest of which date back to 1177 and 1181 AD. Residential and economic constructions were built later, in the 17th century. The Monastery of Geghard is a renowned ecclesiastical and cultural center of medieval Armenia, where a school, scriptorium, library, and many rock-cut dwelling cells for clergymen could be found in addition to the religious constructions. Historians Mkatar Ivanesi, Simeon Ivanesi, who lived and worked there in the 13th century, contributed to the development of the Armenian manuscript art. It was also renowned for the relics housed there. The most celebrated of these was the spear, which had wounded Christ on the cross and was allegedly brought there by the Apostle Thaddeus, from which comes its present name, Geghardavank, the Monastery of the Spear. The spear was kept in the monastery for 500 years. Relics of the apostles Andrew and John were donated in the 12th century, and pious visitors made numerous grants of land, money, and manuscripts over the succeeding centuries. The Monastery of Geghard, with its remarkable rock-cut churches and tombs, is an exceptionally well-preserved and complete example of medieval Armenian monastic architecture and decorative art, with many innovatory features which had a profound influence on subsequent developments in the region. Integrity. The Geghard complex is an exceptionally complete and well-preserved example of a medieval monastic foundation in a remote area of great natural beauty. There have been no changes on the components of the inscribed property since the time of inscription. In addition, the property is surrounded by a substantial buffer zone, established in 1986, within which there are strict controls over any form of development and change. However, its location in an active seismic zone, the pollution of the surrounding environment, the risk of rock slides, as well as the active tourism route are the main threats to the integrity of the site. Authenticity. The Monastery of Geghard, with its remarkable rock-cut churches and tombs, is still preserved in its natural setting. The authenticity of the group is high, not least because the property has been in continuous use as a monastery for many centuries. All constructions included in the property, as well as the landscape, are not threatened in spite of restorations carried out during course of time. To meet conservation challenges, scientific research, renovation, fortification, design and preventive measures have been undertaken in order to ensure that authenticity is retained. Due to the passage of time, a part of the wall adjacent to the auxiliary construction collapsed and was renovated in 2006 to 2007, keeping the original materials. The designs for water isolation of the rock-hewn part and comprehensive interventions for Geghard Monastery were drafted in order to strengthen the complex. Like us and join us at Extreme Collections for more fun and knowledge.